The U.S. Defiant drifted silently through the debris field, its sensors painting a grim picture of the battle that had taken place mere hours ago. Captain Jessica Morrison stood at the bridge's observation window, her weathered features reflected against the backdrop of twisted metal and scattered starship fragments. "Life signs?" she asked, her voice carrying the weight of someone who had seen too many battlefields. Lieutenant Ryan Cooper's fingers danced across his console. "One, ma'am." Faint but steady, coming from what appears to be the command deck of that. He paused, searching for the right words. That monster of a ship. The vessel in question hung in space like a wounded predator, nearly twice the length of the Defiant. Its black hull was torn open in multiple places, exposing deck after deck to the vacuum of space. The design was unlike anything in their database. All sharp angles and reinforced armor plates that reminded Morrison of Earth's ancient sea creatures. "Match it against known signatures," Morrison ordered, already moving toward the tactical station. "Working on it," Commander Thomas Wells replied, his dark skin illuminated by the holographic display. His eyes widened suddenly. "Oh hell. Captain, that's a Xarthi warship." The bridge fell silent. Everyone knew the stories. The Xarthi, nicknamed the Nightmare Hunters by most spacefaring species, were legendary for their ferocity and their unique biological abilities. They were one of the few species that most civilizations feared as much as they feared humans. Morrison straightened her uniform. "Prep a boarding team. Full combat loadout." "Captain," Wells protested, "the Xarthi are apex predators. They evolve mid-battle. We can't just—" "There's someone alive up there, Commander," Morrison cut him off. "And whatever did this to a Xarthi warship is still out there somewhere. We need answers." 20 minutes later, Morrison led her boarding team through the torn corridors of the alien vessel. The interior was even more imposing than the exterior. Everything built to accommodate beings larger and stronger than humans. The emergency lights cast an eerie red glow across surfaces that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. "Movement ahead," Sergeant Sarah Miller whispered, her pulse rifle trained on a partially collapsed doorway. "The life sign is getting stronger." Morrison nodded, signaling the team to advance. They moved with practiced precision, their magnetic boots clicking softly against the deck plates. The path led them to what was clearly a command center, though half of it was exposed to space, protected only by emergency force fields. That's when they saw it. The Xarthi warrior was massive, easily 9 feet tall even in its half-crouched position. Its armor, black as space itself, was cracked and scorched, revealing scales that shifted color like oil on water. But it was the creature's face that captured Morrison's attention. A predator's visage with 4 eyes and rows of teeth that would make a shark envious. Those eyes fixed on Morrison, and to everyone's surprise, the creature's mandibles spread in what could only be described as a grin. "The soft skins who make galaxies burn," it rumbled in surprisingly good English, its voice a deep bass that vibrated in Morrison's chest. "Your reputation precedes you, human. I am War Leader Kasoth of the 3rd Hunt Fleet." Morrison kept her weapon ready but took a step forward. "Captain Jessica Morrison, U.S. Defiant. We picked up your life sign." Kasoth's laugh was like distant thunder. "Of course you did. The only species crazy enough to board a Xarthi warship without hesitation." "Perfect." The warrior shifted, revealing massive wounds that were visibly healing as they watched. "Captain, we have much to discuss. The enemy that did this, they fear only 2 species in all the galaxy. And now I find one of them here, just when we need allies most." Morrison felt a chill run down her spine. In her experience, anything that could frighten both humans and the Xarthi was either going to be incredibly dangerous or incredibly important. Most likely both. "Start talking, War Leader," she said, giving the signal for her team to lower their weapons. "I have a feeling this is going to be an interesting conversation." Commander Marcus Hayes had seen many strange things during his 15 years in the United Defense Force, but watching a 9-foot alien predator delicately hold a coffee mug in the Defiance briefing room topped the list. War Leader Ksoth's claws clinked against the ceramic as the Xarthi warrior examined the drink with all 4 eyes. "Your stimulant beverages are interesting," Ksoth rumbled, taking a careful sip. "Like everything else about your species, seemingly simple, yet remarkably complex." Captain Morrison sat across the table, her own coffee untouched. "You mentioned an enemy that fears both our species. I think it's time you elaborated on that." Ksoth set down the mug, its scales shifting from a deep blue to a more muted gray. "What do you know of the collective, Captain?" "Advanced civilization, heavily automated, claims to be interested in galactic stability," Morrison replied. "They've made several diplomatic overtures to Earth in the past year." The Xarthi's laugh held no humor. "Diplomatic overtures? Yes, they would start that way. Tell me, have they mentioned their interest in human unpredictability? Your species' remarkable ability to find solutions where none should exist." Hayes leaned forward, something cold settling in his stomach. "They've conducted several studies on human problem-solving capabilities, said they were fascinated by our lateral thinking, just as they were fascinated by my people's evolutionary capabilities decades ago." Ksoth's upper eyes narrowed while the lower ones tracked between the human officers, before they tried to sterilize our outer colonies. The briefing room fell silent. Lieutenant Cooper, who had been quietly taking notes, stopped typing. "The collective isn't a civilization," Ksoth continued. "It's a galaxy-spanning intelligence that systematically eliminates what it calls chaos factors, species that demonstrate too much adaptability, too much potential for change. They fear what they cannot predict, cannot control, cannot." The warrior paused, searching for the right word. "Cannot box." Morrison's voice was steel. "Evidence." Ksoth touched a panel on his armor. A holographic display sprang to life above the table, showing tactical data, battle recordings, and diplomatic correspondence. "My ship was carrying this to your people when we were ambushed. The collective has already begun their standard protocol, isolating our worlds from trade routes, spreading rumors about our instability, positioning their peacekeeping fleets at strategic points." Hayes studied the data, his military training highlighting the patterns. "These fleet movements, they're not defensive positions. They're attack staging points." "Precisely." Ksoth's scales rippled with approval. "You see it because your people have been watching for the same patterns. They fear you even more than they fear us. Humans don't just adapt. You innovate. You create chaos they cannot calculate." Morrison stood, pacing the length of the briefing room. "Our analysts have noted unusual ship movements near our border colonies, reports of communication disruptions, trade disputes that seemed manufactured. The same tactics they used against us." Ksoth confirmed. "But they miscalculated. They thought to deal with our species separately. The aggressive evolutionaries and the unpredictable innovators. Instead, they'd given us a common enemy." Hayes watched as Morrison stopped pacing, her expression shifting from concern to something harder. He recognized that look. It was the same one she wore before the Battle of Proxima, when she turned a certain defeat into a stunning victory through sheer audacity. "War Leader," she said, turning to face Ksoth, "how would your people feel about an alliance?" All 4 of Ksoth's eyes gleamed. "My hunt master spoke of this possibility. Humanity's creativity combined with Xarthi adaptation. We could become something the collective's predictions have never accounted for. A nightmare they never saw coming," Morrison agreed, a predatory smile matching Ksoth's own. "Commander Hayes, send word to command. Priority 1 transmission. And War Leader, I believe we have some planning to do." Ksoth rose to his full height, scales shifting to a deep crimson. "Indeed, Captain. Let us show the collective why they were right to fear us both." Lieutenant Emily Parker wiped sweat from her brow as she studied the training ground's defensive layout. The assembled alien observers watched from their protected viewing dome, their expressions ranging from curiosity to barely concealed horror. This was the first joint exercise between human and Xarthi forces, and nobody quite knew what to expect. "Your plan is insane," rumbled Tikoth, the massive Xarthi warrior assigned as her training partner. His scales shifted between shades of gray as he considered the holographic display. The mining charges were not designed for this purpose. Emily grinned. "That's exactly why it'll work. The collective's defensive systems are calibrated against known weapons. But these..." She held up a modified mining charge. "These are just industrial tools, until we rewire them to generate electromagnetic pulses instead of controlled detonations." Tikoth's four eyes blinked in sequence, a gesture she'd learned meant intense interest. "And while their systems are disrupted, your team can get close enough to do what you do best." Emily watched as Tikoth's scales rippled with anticipation. She'd seen holovids of Xarthi evolution in action, but never in person. Today would change that. The exercise began with a simulated collective defense grid, the same type that had repelled 3 previous assault attempts by other species. Standard tactics had failed. Time for something new. Emily's team moved first, using maintenance tunnels that any logical military force would have ignored as too small for strategic value. The modified mining charges were placed at key junction points, their industrial signatures barely registering on defensive scans. "All charges in position," Emily whispered into her comm. "Tikoth, you ready to give them a show?" The response was a low, rumbling laugh. "Watch closely, soft skin. Few ever get to witness this twice." Emily triggered the charges. Instead of explosions, waves of electromagnetic energy pulsed through the defense grid. Shields flickered, sensors went dark, and automated response systems crashed in confusion. That's when the Xarthi struck. Tikoth's team emerged from cover, and Emily felt her jaw drop. Their bodies were changing, adapting in real time to the battlefield conditions. Scales hardened into crystal-like structures that deflected energy weapons. Muscles densified for bursts of impossible speed. One warrior developed heat-radiating patches across their skin to become invisible to thermal sensors. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Tikoth's voice carried pride as his team tore through defenses that had been deemed impregnable. Each evolution triggered by immediate need, shaped by combat itself. Emily's team was moving too, using the chaos to exploit gaps that shouldn't exist. Human ingenuity met Xarthi adaptation in a deadly dance. Where hardened barriers stood, humans found unconventional ways through, while Xarthi evolved to break them. When automated systems adapted to one threat, they faced another that they couldn't predict. In the observation dome, the alien witnesses had fallen silent. They watched as Emily's repurposed mining charges created electromagnetic blind spots, while Tikoth's warriors evolved localized electromagnetic fields of their own, turning the defense grid's remaining power against itself. The exercise ended in 17 minutes. The previous record for breaching such defenses had been 3 hours. "Well," Emily said, watching the scoreboard flash their completion time. "That was fun." Tikoth's scales had settled into a deep blue of satisfaction. "Your species' gift for turning anything into a weapon complements our evolution perfectly." The mining charges. "I would never have considered such a thing. And I'd never have thought of evolving EMP-resistant organs on the fly," Emily laughed. "Think the observers got the message." They both looked up at the viewing dome. The alien dignitaries were huddled together, several speaking urgently into communication devices. The message was clear. When humans and Xarthi worked together, the impossible became merely improbable, and the improbable became inevitable. "I believe," Tikoth rumbled with amusement, "they are beginning to understand why the collective fears us both." Emily checked her modified mining charge, already thinking of new modifications. Good. Because this was just the warm-up. Commander Jack Thompson watched the holographic display as hundreds of dots representing collective defense platforms orbited Stronghold Beta 7. The massive space station hung in space like a metallic spider, its arms bristling with weapon emplacements that had repelled every previous assault. "Their predictive algorithms are already working," reported Lieutenant Rodriguez from her tactical station. "They're shifting defense patterns based on standard attack vectors." Jack allowed himself a smile. "Good thing we're not going to use standard vectors then." He turned to his Xarthi counterpart, Hunt Leader Skara, whose scales rippled with anticipation. "Your warriors ready?" Skara's mandibles clicked in amusement. They completed their vacuum adaptations an hour ago. The new radiation-resistant membranes are interesting. My team reports they tingle. "Fleet positions confirmed," Rodriguez announced. "The collective's automated responses are exactly as predicted. They're clustering their forces to counter conventional fleet formations." Jack nodded to Iskara. "Time to show them why that's a mistake. Launch Operation Chaos Dance." The first phase began with what appeared to be a catastrophic reactor failure aboard 3 human ships. Emergency protocols initiated automatically, and the collective's defense grid registered the vessels as combat ineffective. Standard procedure was to ignore disabled ships and focus on active threats. That was their first mistake. The disabled ships suddenly accelerated, their reactor signatures fluctuating wildly in patterns that confused automated targeting systems. As defense platforms tried to reacquire locks, the ships released clouds of what appeared to be reactor debris. "Boarding pods away," Rodriguez reported with a grin. "Looking like exactly what they expect. Reactor fragments and escaped plasma." Inside those fragments, Xarthi warriors floated in space, their bodies adapted to survive vacuum. What the collective saw as debris was in fact one of the deadliest strike forces ever assembled. "Second phase," Jack ordered. "Let's really give them something to calculate." The main fleet engaged, but not in any pattern the collective could predict. Ships deliberately created chaos, flying paths that seemed random but were carefully calculated to cause maximum confusion. Energy weapons fired at seemingly empty space, while missiles curved in physically impossible trajectories thanks to newly developed gravity drives. The collective's defense grid struggled to predict targets that refused to follow logical patterns. As their algorithms attempted to adapt, the Xarthi strike force reached the station's outer hull. "They've breached," Shkira announced, pride evident in her voice. "The warriors report their new tactile sensory organs are working perfectly. They can feel the station's power conduits through the hull." Jack watched as new dots appeared inside the station. The Xarthi weren't just fighting. They were evolving in real time to counter each security measure they encountered. When the station deployed nerve gas, they developed filters in their skin. When energy shields blocked their path, they evolved bioelectric organs to disrupt the frequencies. "Main fleet executing final approach," Rodriguez reported. "Their predictive systems are showing signs of complete failure. They can't calculate our attack patterns because we're not using any." The station's defenses, designed to counter logical military strategies, couldn't adapt to what appeared to be complete chaos, but was actually an intricately orchestrated dance of unpredictability. While their algorithms struggled to find patterns, both human ships and Xarthi warriors struck from impossible angles. 6 hours after the operation began, Stronghold Beta 7 fell. The collective's impregnable fortress, expected to withstand months of conventional assault, had been conquered in less than a standard day. Jack stood in the station's captured command center, surrounded by evidence of their victory. Scarred's scales had shifted to a deep purple of satisfaction as she examined the collective's command protocols. "They never considered this possibility," she said, mandibles clicking softly. "Their tactical computers tried 37 different prediction models. All failed. Hard to predict chaos," Jack replied, studying the station's strategic data, "especially when it's deliberately orchestrated chaos combined with biological evolution they can't calculate." Skura's upper eyes fixed on him while her lower ones continued scanning data. "The collective will adapt their strategies after this." "Good," Jack grinned, "because so will we. That's the thing about humans and Xarthi. We're at our best when we're forced to improvise. Admiral Rachel Anderson stood before the Galactic Council, her dress uniform pristine under the harsh lights of the Grand Chamber. 300 representatives from various spacefaring civilizations watched with a mixture of fear and fascination as she pulled up the first holographic display. "This," she said, gesturing to the image of a standard maintenance drone, "is what Lieutenant Emily Parker used to breach the outer defenses of Stronghold Beta 7. She pressed a control, and the image shifted to show the drone's modified internals. Her team reprogrammed it to emit a precise frequency that matched the station's own maintenance protocols. The collective systems literally held the door open for them." Murmurs rippled through the chamber. A Xerxian representative raised a tendril. "And these modifications were made in the field, without prior testing." "Correct," Anderson smiled. "Lieutenant Parker designed and implemented the changes in under 20 minutes, using only standard tools and spare parts." The next image appeared. A Xarthi warrior, their scales shifting through various patterns. "This is War Leader Xoth's strike team, recorded during the same operation. Watch carefully." The footage showed the Xarthi encountering a new type of energy barrier. Within seconds, their scales began generating a counter-frequency field. By the time they reached the barrier, their bodies had evolved to pass through it harmlessly. "Impossible," whispered a Mechanid observer, its optical sensors whirring as it analyzed the footage. The energy barrier's frequency was randomized. They couldn't have adapted to an unknown pattern. "They didn't adapt to the pattern," Anderson corrected. "They evolved to generate all possible counter-frequencies simultaneously. The barrier's randomization became irrelevant." More footage played. Humans turning maintenance tools into weapons, Xarthi warriors developing new organs mid-combat, and the two species working in perfect synchronization. Each clip drew more gasps and whispered conversations. "The collective claimed our species were flaws in the galaxy's order," Anderson continued. "They saw human unpredictability as chaos that needed to be controlled. They viewed Xarthi evolution as a threat to their perfect system. They were right about one thing: we are threats to their system, but not because we're flaws." She gestured to her side, where War Leader Xoth emerged from the shadows. His massive form drew instinctive flinches from nearby representatives, but he moved with deliberate grace to stand beside Anderson. "We are not flaws," Xoth rumbled, his voice carrying to every corner of the chamber. "We are the next step in evolution. The collective seeks to freeze the galaxy in perfect, predictable order. But the universe itself runs on chaos, on adaptation, on change." Anderson nodded. The victory at Beta 7 wasn't just about military strength. It was proof that the collective's fundamental philosophy is flawed. They believe that perfect order is the key to advancement. We proved that true advancement comes from adaptation, from improvisation, from embracing chaos and making it work for you. The chamber erupted in questions, but one voice cut through the chaos. A Sylphid elder, known for their neutrality, raised their crystalline form. "And what happens when this alliance of yours runs out of enemies? Will the galaxy trade the collective's rigid order for the chaos of two apex predator species?" Xoth's scales shifted to a deep blue of amusement. "You mistake chaos for destruction. What we offer is not disorder, but dynamic order. Evolution. Growth. The choice isn't between stagnation and chaos," Anderson added. "It's between a galaxy that evolves and one that calcifies. Yes, change can be frightening, but it's also the only way forward." As the council chamber buzzed with debate, news of the presentation spread across the galaxy. Footage of human ingenuity and Xarthi evolution working in harmony became the most watched content on the galactic networks. Species that had feared both races began to see something new in their alliance, not a nightmare to be feared, but perhaps a future to be embraced. The collective's propaganda machine worked overtime to counter the spread of these ideas, but they faced an insurmountable problem. You can't predict or control a story that rewrites itself with every telling. Dr. Michael Cooper stared at the holographic display, his eyes wide with disbelief. The genetic sequence floating before him shouldn't have been possible. A perfect fusion of human adaptability and Xarthi evolutionary prowess. "Run it again," he ordered, his voice hoarse from 18 straight hours of work. The hybrid research station's AI complied, displaying the simulation once more. Beside him, lead geneticist Rakath's scales flickered with excitement, all 4 eyes fixed on the data stream. "The pattern holds, Doctor. Your theory about human neural plasticity was the key we were missing." The laboratory around them hummed with energy as dozens of human and Xarthi scientists worked in perfect synchronization. What had started as a simple research station had evolved into something unprecedented, just like everything else about this alliance. "Jennifer," Michael called out to his lead assistant, "show me the stress response tests again." Dr. Jennifer Martinez brought up another hologram, this one showing side-by-side comparisons of human and Xarthi cellular responses to extreme conditions. "It's beautiful, isn't it? Humans don't just adapt mentally. Our bodies are constantly making micro-adjustments. We just never had the conscious control that the Xarthi possess." Arcath moved closer to the display, his massive form casting shadows over the hologram. "And we never understood how to guide our evolution with creative intent. We react, we adapt, but always along predictable biological paths. Your species dreams of impossible changes and makes them reality." The breakthrough had come 3 days ago, when they discovered that human creativity could actually guide Xarthi evolution. By combining human neural patterns with Xarthi biological responses, they had created something entirely new. "Ready for the first human trial?" Jennifer asked, already knowing the answer. They had selected 10 volunteers from both species for the initial tests. Michael nodded, his heart racing with anticipation. "Bring in the first subject." Lieutenant Sarah Wilson entered the laboratory, her confidence evident despite the forest of sensors attached to her body. As one of the top combat engineers in the fleet, she had a history of quick thinking under pressure. Exactly what they needed for this test. "Remember," Orcath rumbled as technicians made final adjustments, "focus on the change you want to make. Don't think about the process, think about the end result. Let your mind create the path, and your body will follow." Sarah closed her eyes, concentrating. The monitors showed her neural activity spiking in patterns that precisely matched certain Xarthi evolutionary responses. For several tense moments, nothing seemed to happen. Then her skin began to change. "Holy shit," Jennifer whispered, watching as Sarah's forearm developed a metallic sheen. "She's actually doing it. She's adapting her skin composition in real time." The change spread slowly but steadily, transforming her skin into a heat-resistant barrier that could withstand temperatures hot enough to melt steel. When Sarah opened her eyes and saw her arm, her face lit up with wonder. "It tingles," she said, flexing her fingers. "Like pins and needles, but not unpleasant. And I can feel more. The air currents, temperature variations, everything's more vivid." Michael checked the readings, his excitement building. Perfect cellular stability. No rejection response. The neural interface is maintaining steady control over the adaptation process. He turned to Arcath. "Your turn, old friend." The Xarthi scientist stepped into the testing chamber, his scales already shifting in anticipation. They had discovered that just as humans could learn controlled adaptation, the Xarthi could learn to guide their evolution with creative intent rather than pure instinct. Arcath closed his eyes, focusing on the human neural patterns they'd mapped. His body began to change, but not in the reactive way typical of his species. Instead, the changes followed an artistic, almost architectural pattern that no Xarthi had ever achieved before. "This is just the beginning," Michael said, watching as both Sarah and Arcath demonstrated their new abilities. "We're not just combining our strengths, we're transcending the limitations of both our species." Jennifer began preparing the data for transmission to both human and Xarthi high commands. The collective thinks they can predict and control evolution itself. Wait until they see what happens when evolution learns how to dream. Captain Diana Reynolds stood on the bridge of the U.S. Thunderchild, watching as the combined fleet assembled for Operation Thunderstrike. The view was breathtaking. Hundreds of human vessels mixed with Xarthi warships, their black hulls reflecting the light of distant stars. Final system check complete. Commander Jason Mitchell reported from Tactical. All ships report ready. The new quantum uncertainty drives are operating at peak efficiency. Diana nodded, her attention fixed on the holographic display showing their target, the collective's central consciousness hub. Hidden in the heart of a massive nebula, it had taken months of careful intelligence gathering just to confirm its location. Status of the Xarthi Vanguard, she asked, though she could already see their ships taking position. High Hunter VCATH reports their warriors have completed their final evolution cycle, Jason replied. The new hive mind disruption organs are stable and ready for deployment. The plan they'd developed was, by any conventional standard, insane. But conventional thinking hadn't won this war. Diana touched a control, opening a channel to the entire fleet. All ships, this is Captain Reynolds. You all know what's at stake today. The collective believes they can predict every possible outcome, control every variable. Our job is to prove them wrong. She paused, watching status lights flash green across the board. They think they know what we're capable of. Show them how wrong they are. The first phase began with a maneuver that looked like a catastrophic navigation error. 30 ships, both human and Xarthi, appeared to lose control and spiral toward the nebula's edge. The collective's defensive platforms reacted exactly as predicted, moving to intercept what they calculated to be damaged vessels. That's when the quantum uncertainty drives activated. Diana watched as the damaged ships literally flickered in and out of probability, their positions becoming impossible to predict even with the collective's advanced calculation systems. Each ship existed in multiple potential states simultaneously, making targeting them an exercise in futility. Quantum field stable, Jason reported, excitement clear in his voice. The collective's targeting systems are showing complete confusion. They can't lock onto something that exists in 20 places at once. Signal the Xarthi strike teams, Diana ordered. Time to add some biological chaos to this quantum uncertainty. The massive Xarthi warships moved forward, their hulls seeming to ripple as the warriors within underwent their most ambitious evolution yet. They had learned to develop organs that could disrupt hive mind frequencies, but combined with human creativity, they'd taken it further. Each warrior was now a walking quantum anomaly, their very biology fluctuating between states in a way that made the collective's predictive algorithms crash. First line of defense is breaking, Jason announced. They're trying to adapt their protocols, but they can't keep up with the number of quantum variables we're generating. Diana allowed herself a small smile. The collective had built its entire civilization on the principle of predictability, on the idea that with enough processing power, every outcome could be calculated. They never considered what would happen when faced with enemies who could manipulate the very fabric of probability itself. Launch the secondary attack wave, she ordered. Let's give them something else to calculate. The next wave of ships carried specially modified versions of Emily Parker's Chaos generators, now enhanced with Xarthi biotech. As they activated, the nebula itself began to shift and twist, its natural quantum fluctuations amplified to impossible levels. Message from High Hunter VCATH, Jason said. Their warriors have breached the outer hull of the hub. The collective. Captain, they're registering actual fear responses in the hive mind. Diana moved to the tactical display, watching as the combined fleet pressed their advantage. The collective's perfect order was crumbling in the face of deliberately orchestrated chaos, their predictive systems overwhelmed by enemies they couldn't calculate. They're learning what we've known all along, she said, watching as quantum uncertainty met biological evolution in a storm of impossible probability. The future belongs to those who can adapt to chaos, not those who try to control it. The final battle for the galaxy's future had begun, And for the first time in its existence, the collective faced something it couldn't predict: its own extinction. The central chamber of the collective's consciousness hub thrummed with energy as Captain Diana Reynolds and High Hunter Vikath led their final assault. Emergency lighting cast crimson shadows across walls that seemed to pulse with artificial life, while the air itself crackled with the energy of a dying machine god. Their primary consciousness core is attempting to transfer itself, reported Lieutenant Sarah Wilson, her partially evolved form allowing her to sense the massive data streams flowing through the station's systems. Her skin flickered between states of matter, adapting to each new defense the collective deployed. Vikath's massive form moved with liquid grace, his evolved nervous system interfacing directly with the station's quantum field. They seek to escape through their backup networks, but they will find no sanctuary there. The combined strike team pressed forward, each member representing the perfect fusion of human ingenuity and Xarthi adaptation. Warriors evolved organic quantum processors, while human engineers rewrote the laws of physics on the fly. Every defense the collective mounted was met with an impossible counter. "Core chamber ahead," Sarah announced, her enhanced senses piercing the chaos. "They've concentrated everything they have left into one final defense grid." Diana checked the quantum scanner she'd helped design, its display showing probability waves that would have driven lesser minds mad. Status of Operation Infinity Mirror. Executing perfectly, Vikath rumbled, his scales shifting through patterns that shouldn't have been possible in normal space. The fleet has created the quantum probability loop. The collective cannot predict its way out of this trap. The massive doors to the core chamber loomed before them, covered in energy fields that could have vaporized a small moon. But the collective had never planned for opponents who could exist in multiple states of probability simultaneously, who could evolve faster than their defensive algorithms could adapt. Sarah pressed her evolved hand against a control panel, her cells reconfiguring to match its security protocols. "Ready for the final push. On your command, Captain." Diana nodded to Vikath, who had already begun evolving specialized organs to counter whatever waited inside. "Let's show them why they were right to fear us." The assault on the core chamber would be recorded in 1,000 histories, told in 1,000,000 ways across the galaxy. Some would say the humans hacked the very fabric of reality, while others claimed the Xarthi evolved beyond the bounds of physical law. The truth was both, and neither. What actually happened was simpler and more profound. Two species, once feared for their chaotic nature, proved that true advancement came not from controlling chaos, but from embracing it. The collective's final defenses fell not to brute force or predictable tactics, but to warriors who could rewrite their own genetic code while calculating quantum probability shifts. Engineers who could turn safety protocols into weapons while their bodies adapted to withstand forces that should have torn them apart. A perfect union of the unpredictable and the evolutionary. When the quantum dust settled, Diana stood with Vikath before the dormant consciousness core, watching as the last traces of the collective's presence faded from the galaxy's networks. "They never understood," Vikath said, his scales settling into a pattern that somehow expressed both victory and contemplation. "They saw the galaxy as a problem to be solved, chaos to be controlled." "But the galaxy isn't a problem," Diana replied, watching as human and Xarthi worked together to secure the station. "It's a possibility. Every moment is a chance to evolve, to adapt, to become something new." The news spread across the galaxy like a shockwave. The collective had fallen. The empire built on perfect prediction and control had been undone by the very chaos they sought to eliminate. But in its place rose something unprecedented. An alliance that proved chaos and order weren't opposites, but partners in the dance of evolution. In the years that followed, humans and Xarthi would help guide the galaxy into a new age. Not through control or force, but by example. They showed that true strength came not from resisting change, but from embracing it. Not from fearing the unknown, but from seeing it as an opportunity to evolve. The species that hell itself couldn't handle had become the galaxy's guardians, and under their watch, The future wasn't something to be predicted or controlled. It was something to be discovered, one impossible evolution at a time.